Mr. Romney, Mr. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Ms. Sinema, Ms. Smith. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Vance, Mr. Warner, Mr.
Donald Trump-inspired members of Congress. It's not, we don't have a traditional
border bill from being debated, and it is likely done for. That is a big disappointment, as you just heard, to the chief of our Border Patrol, who desperately is looking for more resources to keep the American people safe. Republican Louisiana Senator John Kennedy was against the bill. He sits on the Appropriations, Judiciary, and Budget Committees, and he joins us now. So, Senator, I don't know if you got a chance to hear from Chief Owens, who said that he was disappointed that this would have helped us to make the country safer, would have cut down on the number of single adult males entering the country that we've lost track of, not to mention these gang members as well. So tell us what your take is this afternoon as this thing has imploded.
Well, for several days, Martha, the border bill has been dead. It's been as dead as Woodrow Wilson. And now it's official. We just finished voting. There will be some who will want to continue to talk about this bill. It's their right, but I think they'll just be grooming a corpse. How we got here is no mystery. Some of my Democratic colleagues say Republicans welched on a deal. There was no deal to welch on. As part of this supplemental bill, we asked to have some border provisions explored that might slow President Biden's open border down. Leader McConnell appointed James Lankford to do that. He did the best he could negotiating with people who support an open border. He brought the product back to us in the Republican conference in the Senate, and we said, James, we appreciate.
Well, you know, the question is whether or not it would have made people incrementally safer, because when you have a crisis that we cover here every day, and we're talking about people on the terror watch list who are crossing, you know, likely today, yesterday, while this whole thing is being discussed, people may be entering this country who are planning to do us harm. That's a pretty real assessment. I think it's a fair assessment. This is Kristen Sinema, who is obviously from Arizona, who was part of the three-senator team who put this deal together. Here's what she had to say this morning when she spoke with Bill Hemmer and Dana Perino. Watch.
What our bill does do is close the border during times of high traffic. I do want to note, every single day this year, the border would have been closed had my bill become law. Every single day this year, because the number of people coming is so high.
Obviously, she's very frustrated. She said that in her home state, people they don't care about politics. They want to make at least, and you just said, Senator, that you were looking for some provisions that would improve, right? And when you go through this, and I understand that people on both sides have very big, differences over this, but you don't think there were some provisions in there that were worth moving on?
I can't predict the future. I have to wait for it like everybody else. But I don't see how anybody could look at this bill and confidently predict it would have been an improvement.
Well, the chief of the Border Patrol just said exactly that. Don't you think that he probably knows better than anybody what would have helped his people out a little bit?
and I have great respect for him, but I disagree with him. This bill would have required President Biden. It was given him enormous discretion, and I don't think he cares. And when somebody acts like they don't care, sometimes it's not an act, Martha. This president, for example, Kirsten talked about in your clip there, she talked about the president's emergency powers. The president had emergency powers if he chose to use them.
All right, Senator, thank you very much. Obviously, very hot topic, something that people are very concerned about when they see what's going on in their cities, when people are being arrested. Many people feel like this is something that we need to figure something out quickly, that it can't wait until the election necessarily. So I thank you for giving us your thoughts on all of it as you watch this afternoon, and we'll stay on it. We'll speak with you again soon. Thank you very much, sir. So clear to say that there are deep divides that are playing out across the country on this issue. And when you get to the local level, residents and officials are grappling every day with the influx of migrants and the strain that it is putting on many of our cities. So in Colorado, last night, we found this meeting in Lakewood. Hundreds of people. Look at all these people in the hallways. They all wanted to be there to be part of this conversation. They wanted to make it clear to their leadership they do not have any intention of becoming a sanctuary city, which they're concerned might happen. Watch.
City Council is not discussing anything using the word sanctuary. They use words like good neighbor, welcoming, inclusive, supporting, sheltering. It's technically true, Denver may not be asking us. We're asking them, can we help you?
We're going to talk to the residents from there coming up next. So some new developments today around the migrants suspected of beating NYPD officers in Times Square in this horrific video. So a senior border official telling Fox that 4 of them, believed to have fled New York, are still at large. There's a manhunt that is underway across multiple law enforcement agencies, and the release of the suspects in these beatings without bail prompted the GOP calls to fire Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg.
He is failing to execute the most basic functions of that job, which is to protect the people of Manhattan. In my view, he's almost a danger to the borough of Manhattan.
So across the country, residents are expressing concern and anger in some cases about this growing migrant crisis. They are flooding town hall meetings because they're concerned about how it might impact their community. And one of those happened last night in Lakewood, Colorado. Look how busy, look how crowded, I should say, this room is. These people turned out in force. This is a suburb of Denver. The residents gathered there to voice their opposition. They say they do not like the language that's being used around how they're going to help in this issue. They do not want to be a sanctuary city, just like Denver, which took in 40,000 migrants in the past year. Lakewood officials insist Lakewood has no plans to become a sanctuary city. They're simply offering to help Denver with the influx and be, quote, good neighbors. It's not sitting too well with some of the Lakewood residents. Watch this.
Why did our city manager go to the city of Denver to see how is Lakewood going to help the city of Denver with this migrant issue?
That Lakewood resident, Mary Jansen, joins us now. She attended last night's meeting. She's a former Lakewood City Council member, and she has lived there for close to 60 years. Mary, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us what happened at this meeting, why so many of the residents seem to sense that this is sliding in a direction that they're concerned about.
Absolutely. So we had a council meeting. Now, I wasn't at that council meeting, but I did watch it. And after that meeting and our general reports, they came out with the council voted to send the city manager to Denver to see how Lakewood could help them with the migrant issue. It kind of left some open doors, and everyone's wondering, are we a sanctuary city or are we not? Are we going to be a sanctuary city? What does that entail? They weren't talking to any of the people. I mean, I have talked to several people who have contacted their counselors and they're not getting straight answers.
Okay.
So there was a group of people that got together and this viral meeting took place. And as you can see.
Mary, I'm sorry to jump in on you, and I do appreciate your time today. I hope you'll come back. We're going to stay on this Lakewood story, but I have to break away right now because we're hearing from the Secretary of State. My thanks to Mary Jansen joining us from Lakewood. That is the story we'll stay on. Here's the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, on the heels of discussions over a hostage deal talk. Watch.
Lost someone that they love. And day after day, more people are killed. On all of my previous visits here, and pretty much every day in between, we have pressed Israel in concrete ways to strengthen civilian protection, to get more assistance to those who need it. And over the past 4 months, Israel has taken important steps to do just that, starting the flow of aid, doubling it during the first pause for hostage releases, opening the north and south corridors in Gaza so that people could move out of immediate harm's way through these corridors with 4 hours pause every day, 3 hours notice. Opening Kerem Shalom, starting the flow of assistance from Jordan, establishing deconfliction mechanisms for humanitarian sites. As a result, today, more assistance than ever is moving into Gaza from more places than at any time since October 7th. As the largest donor of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians, the United States has helped provide much of that assistance, including funding 90,000 metric tons of flour delivered from Ashdod Port. That's enough to provide bread for 1.4 million people for the next 5 months. A UN team began its mission to the north to assess conditions for the civilians who are still there, as well as what needs to be done to allow displaced Palestinians to return back home to the north. And yet, as I said to the Prime Minister and to other Israeli officials today, the daily toll that its military operations continue to take on innocent civilians remains too high. In our discussions today, I highlighted some key steps that Israel should take to ensure that more aid reaches more people in Gaza. Israel should open Erez so that assistance can flow to northern Gaza, where, as I said, hundreds of thousands of people are struggling to survive under dire conditions. It should expedite the flow of humanitarian assistance from Jordan. It should strengthen deconfliction and improve coordination with the humanitarian providers. And Israel must ensure that the delivery of life-saving assistance to Gaza is not blocked for any reason by anyone. We urge Israel to do more to help civilians, knowing full well that it faces an enemy that would never hold itself to those standards, an enemy that cynically embeds itself among men, women, and children, and fires rockets from hospitals, from schools, from mosques, from residential buildings, an enemy whose leaders surround themselves with hostages, an enemy that has declared publicly its goal to kill as many innocent civilians as it can simply because they're Jews, and to wipe Israel off the map. That's why we've made clear that Israel is fully justified in confronting Hamas and other terrorist organizations. And that's why the United States has done more than any other country to support Israel's right to ensure that October 7th never happens again. Israelis were dehumanized in the most horrific way on October 7th. The hostages have been dehumanized every day since. But that cannot be a license to dehumanize others. The overwhelming majority of people in Gaza had nothing to do with the attacks of October 7th. And the families in Gaza whose survival depends on deliveries of aid from Israel are just like our families. Their mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, want to earn a decent living, send their kids to school, have a normal life. That's who they are. That's what they want. And we must not lose sight of that. We must not lose sight of our common humanity. We remain determined as well to pursue a diplomatic path to a just and lasting peace and security for all in the region, and notably for Israel. And that diplomatic path continues to come into ever sharper focus as I travel throughout the region and talk to all of our friends and partners. An Israel that's fully integrated into the region, with normal relations with key countries, including Saudi Arabia, with firm guarantees for its security, alongside a concrete, time-bound, irreversible path to a Palestinian state living side by side in peace and security with Israel, with the necessary security assurances. Over the course of this trip, we discussed both the substance and sequence of steps that all would need to take to make this path real. That includes steps by the Palestinian Authority to reform and revitalize itself. And I reaffirmed the imperative of those steps in my meeting today with President Abbas. Chief among them, improving governance, increasing accountability to the Palestinian people, reforms that the Palestinian Authority is committed to make in a recently announced reform package, and that we urge it to implement swiftly. Now, we can see so many of the actors in the region lining up to move down the path that I just described. But some are not. Some are trying to sabotage that path. Iran and its proxies continue to escalate and expand the cycle of violence that we all want to break. We'll continue to defend our people. We'll continue to defend our interests in the face of such attacks, not to fuel escalation, but to prevent it. Finally, in my discussions today with the Prime Minister and senior officials, I also raised our profound concerns about actions and rhetoric, including from government officials, that inflame tensions, that undercut international support, and place greater strains on Israel's security. The people of Israel have sacrificed enormously to forge this nation and to defend it. They'll ultimately decide the right path to take and whether they're ready to make difficult choices necessary to realize the vision of a long, elusive process of true peace and true security. As a true friend of Israel, as the country that has always been first to its side, whether that was May 14th, 1948, or October 7th, 2023, we will always offer our best advice on the choices before this country, especially the ones that matter most. Thank you. Happy to take some questions.
The first question goes to Zolan Kano-Youngs with the New York Times.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for the question. Just have a couple for you here. I know that you said there's still room for agreement in terms of the negotiations over the release of hostages, but the Prime Minister, after you spoke with him, pretty bluntly dismissed Hamas's response, describing it even as ludicrous. I just want to clarify, is this response or these negotiations DOA at this point? And what specifically did the Prime Minister object to in that response? Also, the Prime Minister, shortly after you met with him, made clear that Israeli troops will be moving deeper into Rafah. Will the United States simply stand by as this action is pursued, even with 1 million Palestinians, more than 1 million Palestinians being held are in Rafah, seemingly with nowhere to go? And if I may, Congress is now moving ahead with a bill that would pair aid for Ukraine with aid for Israel. Would the administration endorse any potential package that once again prohibits UNRWA funding? Thank you.
That's impressive. Now, I'm taking it that that includes the questions of all of your colleagues as well. Is that right?
I don't think so. Couldn't do that.
All right. Starting with the first part. Look, as I said, we've looked very carefully at what came back from Hamas, and there are clearly non-starters in what it's put forward. But we also see space in what came back to pursue negotiations to see if we can get to an agreement, and that's what we intend to do. And I'm not going to speak for Israel or anyone else involved, but again, we believe the space is there, and we believe that we should pursue it. With regard to Rafah, look, as I said before, Israel has the responsibility, has the obligation to do everything possible to ensure that civilians are protected and that they get the assistance they need in the course of this conflict. Any military campaign, military operation that Israel undertakes needs to put civilians first and foremost in mind. And I suggested, again, some ways to do that. And that's especially true in the case of Rafah, where there are somewhere between 1.2 and 1.4 million people, many of them displaced from other parts of that in anything that's done in any military operations, the situation for civilians is first and foremost in mind, and that the necessary steps are taken to make sure that they're protected and they have the assistance they need.
You suggested some ways to do that.
Well, I just went through a number of things that we urge Israel to do now on the building on what it's already done in terms of both humanitarian assistance and civilian protection. And as I said, in the case of Rafah itself, that's extremely important because it has such a dense population, including many people who've been displaced from other parts of Gaza. And on UNRWA, look, we were deeply concerned by the allegations that were made about the participation or involvement of some of its employees in October 7th. And it's imperative that, as the UN has said it's doing, that there be a thorough investigation, that there be clear accountability, and that there be clear measures put in place to make sure that this can't happen again, that personnel working for it were not in any way involved in terrorism or the events of October 7th. We know that the work that UNRWA performs, the functions that it performs, have to be preserved because so many lives are depending on it. And so going forward, we're going to look to the actions that are taken. And as I said, it's imperative that the functions be preserved.
Administration then would potentially support an aid package that still prohibited funding for UNRWA.
I'm not going to get ahead of our views on hypothetical pieces of legislation.
Although there was
Thank you.
already an aid package that the administration endorsed that prohibited that funding.
I'll leave that to the next time. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
For the next question, Gil Tamery with Channel 13.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for the opportunity. Gil Tamari, Channel 13. It seems to be that the entire Biden doctrine vis-a-vis Israel, a future Palestinian state, and normalization with Saudi Arabia is collapsing. Netanyahu says no with capital N to any form of a Palestinian state. Saudi Arabia says a normalization with Israel will only be considered after an independent Palestinian state is formed in the 1967 borders, which is Jerusalem as its capital. So how does the U.S. intend to break this deadlock? And secondly, regarding the hostage deal, after we listen tonight to Prime Minister Netanyahu that says that Hamas's demands are delusional, how do you find the space, as you mentioned, for negotiation? And do you feel that Netanyahu is exhausting every possible option to bring back the Israeli citizens kidnapped and held hostage by Hamas? Or again, Israeli politics is intervening? And lastly, why did you cancel your visit tomorrow to Kerem Shalom?
So this is good. We have I think we have a trend going of at least 3 questions per question. Last question first. There was no planned visit to Kerem Shalom, so there was nothing to cancel. One of the things we want to make sure, as well as I said, is that assistance be able to move smoothly and sustainably, but there was nothing to cancel. Second, I guess I'll go in reverse order. On the hostage agreement, again, I can only repeat myself. Clearly, there are things that Hamas sent back that are absolute non-starters, and I assume that's what the Prime Minister was referring to, but I don't want to speak for him. But at the same time, we see in what was sent back space to continue to pursue an agreement, and these things are always negotiations. It's not flipping a light switch. It's not yes or no. There's invariably back and forth. And as I said, we see the space for that. And given the imperative, given the importance that we all attach to bringing the hostages home, we're intent on pursuing it. Finally, as I've said before, we were, before October 7th, pursuing the possibility of normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And in fact, I was scheduled to come to Israel and to Saudi Arabia, I believe it was on October 10th, to pursue that, and in particular, to focus on what we already knew back then was a necessary Palestinian component to any normalization agreement. When I saw the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia just a couple of days ago, he repeated to me his desire and determination to pursue normalization. But he also repeated that in order to do that, 2 things need to happen. 1, there needs to be calm in Gaza. 2, there needs to be a clear and credible pathway to a Palestinian state. So, as I said before, you can see the path forward for Israel and for the entire region, with integration, with normalization, with security assurances, with the pathway to a Palestinian state that entirely changes the equation and the future for the better, for Israelis, for Arabs, for Palestinians, and in so doing, isolates groups like Hamas, isolates countries like Iran that want a very different future. But as I also said, going down that path, pursuing it requires hard decisions. None of this is easy. And so it will be up to Israelis to decide what they want to do, when they want to do it, how they want to do it. No one's going to make those decisions for them. All that we can do is to show what the possibilities are, what the options are, what the future could be, and compare it to the alternative. And the alternative right now looks like an endless cycle of violence and destruction and despair. We know where the better path lies, but I don't minimize in any way the very difficult decisions that would need to be made by all concerned to travel down that path.
Anton LaGuardia with The Economist.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Can you've used some very specific words in describing this vision for a better path. What do you actually mean by clear, credible, irreversible, time-bound path to a Palestinian state? And in Qatar, and again today, you spoke about Israel receiving security guarantees and assurances from its neighbors. What does that actually mean? What's on the table for Israel if it goes down this path? And would that include additional U.S. assurances to Israel on top of the arrangements that currently exist? Thank you.
Look, I'm not going to get ahead of...
Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other officials today to discuss Hamas's proposal, counter-proposal to release hostages. They also discussed the U.S.'s requests, and he seems to be saying firm requests, for the Israelis to limit the number of casualties. They're not happy that the Israelis are moving to Rafah, which they've said is the last place for Palestinians to flee from the violence, and now they're facing violence in Rafah as well. Joining me now is MSNBC anchor Ayman Mohyeldin. Ayman, it's good to have you. Let's talk about this Hamas counter proposal. President Biden today said it was a little over the top, and then Benjamin Netanyahu said it was ludicrous. What was the proposal? What are they asking for?
So we learned from Paris that there was a framework that had been put in place that would largely follow what had previously been agreed to, which is kind of exchange of hostages for release of Palestinian prisoners. We didn't know what the demands from the Palestinians was going to be, specifically the number and what else that it was that Hamas wanted. But today we were able to learn that, and they put forth a proposal that asked for the release of 1,500 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for Israeli hostages that include women, anyone under 19 years old, and the elderly and the sick. In addition, they wanted 500 Palestinians who were serving at least life sentences in Israeli prisons, and all women and children held by Israel, captured or held since October 7th.
Life sentences for the 500. Do you know what they're accused of, what Israel says they did?
Yeah, Israel accuses them of committing terrorism, the murder of Israelis, masterminds of terrorist attacks that took place against Israeli civilians. So they had served, and many of them serving multiple life sentences, some as many as 46 life sentences.
And this is not for Israeli soldiers that are currently being held hostage. This
Correct.
is just women and children who were supposed to come out in the first round.
Correct. This is only for Israelis that are being held by Hamas that are under the age of 19, as well as women and elderly or sick.
Tony Blinken was also saying that even though there were some non-starters in that proposal, he does see some room to negotiate. Have you gotten a sense from your conversations where that room might be?
It's very hard for me to say. I think the understanding of what might be negotiable is to do with the quantity of aid trucks, the type of positioning of the Israeli military, Israeli reconnaissance over the Gaza Strip, the allowing of Palestinians, the movement inside Gaza Gaza itself from the north to the south, to be able to get in tents, because those were some of the demands as well that Hamas had asked for. The deployment of 60,000 mobile home units, 200,000 tents to allow for refugees to have shelter in the winter. So those areas are probably where there's going to be quick agreement on how to get that humanitarian aid and what type of humanitarian aid.
One of the other things that he mentioned is that he's still on this diplomatic tour across the Middle East, and what he's hearing from leaders of Arab countries is that they want to see a path toward a Palestinian state in order to normalize relations with Israel. He's repeated that and reiterated that multiple times. He even said the sequence and substance of steps for regional integration. Do we have a sense of how receptive Benjamin Netanyahu is to that?
We do. He said no to a Palestinian state. He's very clear about that. So I think this is the
But he does want regional stability. He does want normalization with Saudi Arabia.
And I think the Arab states have been pointing to that statement from the prime minister that there won't be a Palestinian state and say you can't have your cake and eat it too. So on one hand, while the Arab world, and certainly Saudi Arabia, which is the last great country or the last large country, if you will, in the Arab world that has not normalized with Israel officially, they're saying we will not have diplomatic relations with Israel very explicitly unless there is a Palestinian state on 1967 borders. So what it has done really is put the ball squarely in the Israeli prime minister's court, because what the Saudis are saying to the Americans and to the Israelis is, we don't necessarily anticipate a state will be announced tomorrow, but we also can't keep doing what has happened in the years in the past, where there's UN Security Council resolutions, frameworks for agreements, Oslo peace process, and none of that is producing a viable Palestinian state.
And what you had from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today was that the only way to get peace would be to completely rout out Hamas, no existence of Hamas whatsoever. And then the day after, he says, he didn't say occupation, he said he would demilitarize Gaza, but that Israel would also be in charge of keeping Gaza demilitarized, which I think was an interesting
it's an interesting thing,
words.
Right? It's an interesting thing, parsing words a little bit, but also I think the general consensus among Americans is defeating Hamas is one thing, destroying Hamas is another. And Israel has set out its mission to destroy Hamas. Realistically speaking, I don't think many in the American security establishment, certainly not the intelligence community, not in the military community, feel militarily. It can defeat it, it can set it back, but as we have seen, at some point you're going to have to engage with it, as they are right now, to secure the release of these hostages.
It's very difficult to destroy an idea. Ayman Mohyeldin, Ayman, thank you very much. And yesterday, a federal appeals court called Donald Trump Citizen Trump and demolished his argument for presidential immunity. Tomorrow, the Supreme Court will consider whether to demolish his candidacy, hearing oral arguments in the Colorado suit, which argues Trump is not eligible to be president under the Constitution because he's an insurrectionist. Joining us now, NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett. So set up tomorrow for us, Laura.
Hey, Katie. So for a long time, this had really been a debate confined to sort of legal circles, dinner party conversation about whether the former president could actually be disqualified under the 14th Amendment. But then Colorado did something bold, something that no other state had done before, despite the fact that there had been dozens upon dozens of lawsuits all over the country about trying to get Mr. Trump kicked off the ballot. And Colorado said, we're kicking him off the ballot because, one, he's covered under the 14th Amendment. He actually engaged in an insurrection. And we think that this is something that the courts, not Congress, but state courts are allowed to resolve under the 14th Amendment. Those are sort of the core issues. There's a bunch of other issues, but those are sort of the core issues that I'm going to be looking for tomorrow to see how the justices want to grapple with that, whether they want to delve into the merits on the actual insurrection on January 6th itself. Do they want to take that on? Or do they want to look for one of the more, what we might call procedural off-ramps and decide not to touch the insurrection, but to find that the former president is not covered by the 14th Amendment for some other reason, Katie?
Laura Jarrett. Laura, thank you very much. Joining us now, constitutional law expert and New York Times opinion columnist David French. David, it's good to have you on this again. Remind us again, the 14th Amendment, Section 3, what does it say?
It says that if you've taken an oath of office as a member of the government and then you engage in insurrection, you cannot be an officer of the United States government again, or you cannot be a congressman, an elector again. So once you take the oath, if you violate the oath, then you violate the oath by aiding and abetting an insurrection or engaging in an insurrection, then you can't serve again unless Congress lets you serve. It's a very simple amendment.
Let's take two things here. We'll leave the whether Donald Trump participated in insurrection to the side for a moment. Is the president an officer of the government?
Yes, absolutely, he's an officer. Now, there are those who argue that he is not an officer under the United States, which is a very highly technical legal argument. But I think it is. It doesn't match the text, and it doesn't match the history and tradition around this particular amendment. And under this particular amendment, it's very clear that it's meant to be very expansive. And clearly, a president is an officer. A president is the chief executive officer. They're an officer of the United States. So I think that argument is among the weakest arguments that Trump will bring.
Well, it's interesting. Lawfare brought up something that Justice Scalia said about the officer of the United States and whether presidents are. And Scalia said yes. I'll read this from the Lawfare article. If the Supreme Court wants to definitively lift the shadow of Section 3, not just from the 2024 presidential race, but also from the January 6, 2025 counting and certification of electoral college votes, the likely simplest and most definitive way to do so is to adopt the argument that the president is not an officer of the United States. But one relevant fact about that argument has received surprisingly little attention. Justice Antonin Scalia, according to a 2014 concurrence he authored and a short private letter he wrote explaining it, believed that the president was indeed an officer of the United States for constitutional purposes. In addition, a strong case can also be made that founding father Alexander Hamilton likewise believed that the president was an officer of the United States. Can you explain this Scalia opinion?
Yeah, so essentially what you're talking about is the term officer. Is it a term that has a special, unique meaning specifically for this particular amendment? Or is it the term that has the general meaning that it has in regular life? And the rule is that words in law have the meaning that they generally have in life unless the statute or the rule itself changes the meaning. And that's not what is happening here. So in that sense, what Scalia is talking about is the word officer means officer. And the president is an officer. This is sort of basic civics 101, and the language of the 14th Amendment, Section 3, doesn't contain special language that opts the president out of that definition. So he's an officer, and his argument that he's not an officer, I think is specious. I don't think it's going to go anywhere with the Supreme Court.
What if the Supreme Court wanted to argue or decide that Donald Trump didn't participate in insurrection as defined by Amendment 14, Article or Section 3? Could they do that?
They could absolutely do that. They could choose to say that January 6th either wasn't an insurrection or the conduct that Trump engaged in, as we know, thanks to the January 6th Commission, for example, that didn't mean that he engaged in an insurrection or that he provided aid or comfort for an insurrection. So it's entirely possible they look at these facts and say, you know what, this is just too far from the context of 1861 and the Civil War and all of that for it to apply to Donald Trump. That is very possible. However, I think that if you look again at the historical record, it's pretty clear that the framers of the amendment were not intending that it apply only to the Civil War or to circumstances like the Civil War, because there had been other insurrections in American history, and they did not specify that this was going to apply to the Civil War only.
Explain that. Why do you say it didn't specifically apply to the Civil War? What's the language in this amendment that makes it broader than that?
Well, it just talks about engaging in an insurrection. It doesn't specify the particular insurrection of 1861 to 1865. They could have absolutely done that. They could have passed an amendment that says the participants in the civil strife from the periods 1861 to 1865 aren't eligible to serve. No, what happens is the framers of the amendment learned their lessons from the insurrection of 1861 and 1865 and how dangerous insurrectionists could be if they gained power again. So they're learning lessons from 1861. They were not confining the amendment to the Civil War. And why were they not? Because there had been other insurrections in American history, Shays Rebellion, Whiskey Rebellion, other insurrections. And so this would apply to that circumstance as well.
Why do conservative scholars, legal scholars, constitutional scholars say that this was an insurrection pretty clearly?
Well, yeah, the definition of an insurrection, especially a definition of an insurrection as we understood it at the time the amendment was passed, really relates to the use of violence for a public or political purpose. Not just violence, say, to steal something, or violence for the sake of vengeance, but this is violence for the sake of a public political purpose. In other words, it's trying to alter the government in some way by violent and illegal means. And that is a classic definition of an insurrection. And in fact, what we had in 2020 was the equivalent, and in early 2021 was the equivalent of an attempted coup. This was an attempt to change the government of the United States. So again, this is classic insurrectionary behavior. You've got violence, you've got illegality tied to an effort to alter the government of the United States.
What about this idea that there's not jurisdiction for the courts, that the secretaries of state don't have jurisdiction, that ultimately Congress should be deciding this?
Now, that is an interesting argument where if you see the court drilling down on this, you might see that they're headed in the direction of, wait a minute, Congress had to pass some enabling statutes before you could apply this. However, I don't think that's what the amendment says. If you look at the amendment, what it clearly says is Congress can act to remove the disability. In other words, Congress can act to make someone eligible again. But it doesn't say that Congress has to act to make them ineligible, that they're ineligible if they participated in the insurrection or provided aid and comfort for the insurrection. That's when they're ineligible. That provision should be held to be self-executing. But I do think if the Supreme Court is looking for a way out here, where they don't go ahead and rule that January 6th wasn't an insurrection, which could be a very dangerous precedent to set, quite frankly, or that the president isn't an officer, which again is a weird construct to think that he's not. If they want to avoid this, they may say, wait a minute, Congress never enacted a statute that provides the framework for deciding whether someone's an insurrectionist or not.
But there have been cases in history where somebody has been taken off the ballot, right? This has been used before or removed from office.
Well, there was, again, going into the late 1860s, so this is enacted, this is ratified in 1868. There was an enormous amount of controversy around the former Confederate officers at that time. And then unfortunately what happened, Katie, before you could really develop a full jurisprudence of this amendment and this section of the amendment, is that there was an Amnesty Act passed several years later that lifted the disability, lifted the prohibition, and allowed an awful lot of former Confederate office holders back into office. And so we didn't get to have that sort of full judicial explanation of this section because Congress kind of cut it off at the knees in 1872. So really, this is going to be the first time that the Supreme Court certainly has really fleshed this out.
It's going to be a big day tomorrow. We're going to be listening carefully, as I know you will too. David, I look forward to your insights following that. Thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much for having me.
And as expected, another major fail in the Senate as bipartisan lawmakers torpedoed a bipartisan bill aimed at finally addressing the southern border. Joining us now, Democratic Senator from California, Alex Padilla. Senator Padilla chairs the Senate Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, and Border Safety. There are a lot of Americans out there who are looking at the southern border, sir, and they're saying it is a mess. Something needs to be done, and they might look at this bill and say, at least that is a start. Why did you vote against it?
Yeah, well, good to see you again, Katie. Look, I had my reasons for voting against. It's very different than the
Sign up now, and we'll match your first deposit up to $1,000 in casino bonus funds. Play your favorite games, and you could win the next big jackpot. Only at GoldenNuggetCasino.com.
Local 4 News is live in Warren.
Covering the changes here.
New Warren Mayor Lori Stone is here to talk to us about the future of this city.
Accomplishing some great things here.
Definitely building some leaders.
A lot of people talking about the economy.
And tonight at 5:30, we're in Detroit at the Adams Butzel Complex.
We're proud of our neighborhood.
Hearing about the issues.
To remediate as much blight as possible.
There's underrepresentation for good quality health care.
Local 4 News is in your neighborhood. Tonight at 5:30.
It feels like people know your story. You got turned down at Shark Tank, and then you have built this. You're like, oh, Michelle Obama is enjoying my makeup. Do you feel that your story is told the right way?
The story has certainly evolved. People think that I'm the makeup person, and I'm really like the self-esteem person.
Melissa and I sit down and we talk about leaning into fear. We also talk about finding that next inspiration and when we shouldn't say yes.
A conversation with Melissa Butler. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch this story now. Local 4 celebrates Black History Month.
First at 4, claims of price gouging over insulin. We're going to talk about some groundbreaking legal action and who is involved in that fight. Here's Paula.
Wanting, needing, and getting mental health care.
You're no longer 12. You become 18. The law will start to look at your behavior as criminal.
Can be harder than it sounds. We have one local mother's story.
Also, the Forewarn Weather Team says we could see record-breaking, feels like spring temperatures, but you might also need an umbrella. First at 4 starts now.
Live from downtown Detroit, Local 4 News First at 4 starts now.
Good afternoon. I'm Devin Skillian in for Karen Drew, who is on special assignment right now. First at 4, new federal lawsuits are making claims of price gouging when it comes to life-saving insulin. Cities of Detroit, Macomb, Wayne, Washtenaw, Monroe counties are the first in Michigan to join this fight. They are suing some of the biggest drug companies and pharmacy benefit managers, alleging that they have worked together to inflate the price of insulin. Local governments say they bear the high price of insulin for their low-income residents and employees. One of the attorneys involved laid out the goals.
The allegations are allegations under the RICO statute, as well as the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Michigan Antitrust Act, and the Consumer Protection Act. We're seeking to halt that behavior. We're seeking to have compensatory and punitive damages. And bottom line, we want to stop the bad behavior.
A news conference occurring late today. We are getting reaction from the drug industry. We'll have more on these allegations coming up tonight on Local 4 News at 6. Warren police tell us a 13-year-old boy is facing a felony charge in a school threat. Officers were sent to Chatterton Middle School yesterday regarding a student making death threats. They say the teen sent threats to another student after a physical altercation that happened on Monday. And we're told a search of his home turned up a 9mm handgun and a BB replica firearm. The 13-year-old is in custody this afternoon and faces perhaps up to 10 years in custody if convicted. Fallout from the guilty verdicts, meanwhile, for Jennifer Crumbley still sinking in for families, prosecutors, and police across the country, not just here. The mother of the Oxford High School shooter, the first parent to be held criminally responsible for a child's deadly actions. Jury foreperson giving us more insight into those verdicts. She appeared exclusively on the Today Show with Savannah Guthrie.
For me, I just feel like Jennifer didn't separate her son from the gun enough to save those lives that day.
You felt she was the last person known to have had custody of the gun.
Yes.
And then somehow it ends up in his hands.
And I think the responsibility of securing the weapon then falls on her.
Jury, of course, found Crumbley guilty on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Should be sentenced April 9th, facing a maximum of 15 years. She's been behind bars already for 2 years. Now, the verdicts will likely be appealed. They have plenty of parents wondering about their legal responsibilities if they happen to be coping with a child who's troubled. More families may feel pressure to get some help, but some say finding that help can be very challenging just now. Paula Tutman live with one mother's emotional journey. Paula.
Gina didn't know her son was spiraling with learning disabilities and mental health struggles.
Back in 2008, when he was 12, even prior to that, that wasn't a space or an area that even myself had not heard of. A lot of these different disorders.
That was then, this is now. Her son continued to decline. His mental health struggles becoming part of his overall disabilities until mental health decline met uninformed law enforcement.
You know, there was a struggle. So now it went from a mental health issue to now you gotten tased and arrested.
Gina educated herself to understand what was happening to her son. Now working on her doctoral dissertation, the story is the same for many, many people, Gina says, particularly young men of color.
My son, with being undiagnosed, there is a word construct for that, and it's called pipelines to prison. There is over 47% of the people who, particularly black males, who are incarcerated, have learning disabilities.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Rose Moten, Local 4's resident mental health expert, says these days mental health decline is on a sharp incline.
You have children that are growing up from the age of 3, 4, 5. They're playing violent games where the goal is to murder individuals. And they're being desensitized. When we grew up, Paula, we played outside.
Yes, immediate hands-on resources can be tough to find depending on where you live and what's available at a time when demand for mental health services can exceed supply.
If your child says anything or you just feel your child is a potential threat to themselves or a potential threat to someone else, if they're suicidal or they're potentially homicidal, get them to an emergency room, a hospital emergency room. Let them be evaluated. Sometimes that can speed up the process.
We're all failing these young people because these are invisible disabilities. You don't have a physical observation. You don't see that there's something wrong with them.
You have to ask for referrals. You go to the school, see if there's school mental health individuals that perhaps can be in the interim before you get them consistent services with an outside mental health therapist. Advocate, advocate, advocate.
Yeah, and there are also resources that are available, including the 988 suicide hotline, in which you do not have to be specifically feeling suicidal in order to get navigation, help, or even some de-escalation. And our wonderful ClickOnDetroit.com team, they've put together a resource guide on our website so that you can see what is indeed available in your area as well. Stay with me at 6. We take you inside mental health decline with someone who's been there and survived it. Devin?
You got it, Paul. And so happy we get that resource guide because so many people just don't know exactly where to even start. All right, more from Paula coming up here tonight at 6. Governor Whitmer, meanwhile, just released her new budget recommendations in Lansing today. Her proposal, totaling more than $80 billion, doesn't include any tax increases. Governor says paying off retirement debt early for certain educators has freed up $670 million. 2 budget highlights. She's asking for $159 million to expand free pre-K to every 4-year-old in Michigan. That would be 2 years ahead of schedule, the original layout for that plan. She's also seeking $30 million to expand free tuition at community college for every Michigan high school graduate who doesn't already have a degree. Business Editor Ron Maloney will have a closer look at the budget tonight on Local 4 News at 5. All right, we take a live look at downtown Detroit. You can probably feel the warm-up we've been talking about. We're seeing temps in the mid-40s. Brett Collar has an update filling in for Kim tonight. Hey there, Brett.
Not too bad right now. We're talking about numbers well above where we should be this time of the year. A couple of exceptions, upper 30s in Grosse Ile, low 40s in Mount Clemens. but we're going to tap on about 10 degrees to these numbers by Friday. We're talking upper 50s, maybe a couple of 60s dotting the map. That's record-breaking territory. We'll dive more into that coming up. Local 4 News at 5. Clouds on the increase from the west. Out ahead of that, decent amount of clearing, so some decent sunshine here today. We'll get a little bit more tomorrow before that rain moves back in. As for this evening, it's quiet. We're going down to see Michigan take on Ann Arbor. Ann Arbor. 40s falling into the 30s by the time you head out of the game. But again, we are talking about rain chances and that record-breaking day possible Friday. We'll dive more into it coming up in just a minute.
All right, Brett. Local 4's march through Metro Detroit continues this afternoon. This week, our In Your Neighborhood team has been in Belleville, Warren, and today it's Northwest Detroit, visiting an amazing community hub there. Damon Fernandez and Karen Drew will be bringing our 5:30 newscast to you live from there. They join us now with a preview. Hey there, friends.
Hey there, Devin. It's so good to see you, and it's so good to be here at the Adams Butzel Recreation Center. We're on the city's northwest side. You know you're going to have a good time when the bows and arrows start coming out, right?
Yeah, you know, here they have so many programs, and archery is just one of the popular programs that folks, young and old, like to enjoy it. You see some community members, some students right now behind us participating in archery classes right now with their instructor, Tanisha. I'll tell you, people in this area have been telling us that there's so many positive things, some positive momentum happening here. They're also pointing us to some of the hot spots and hidden gems in this community. Among them, they told me about the Loyola High School Detroit. It's a place that they say is grooming some young men, young scholars do some positive things, and the school's also finding ways to give back to the community. Take a look. Off Fenkell and Pinehurst on Detroit's northwest side, many neighbors have grown to know Loyola High School Detroit as a gem in the community.
Loyola's been here in this neighborhood for 30 years now.
This private Catholic school for boys has about 1,200 students. Most of the young scholars are from this community. Others travel from points across Detroit metro area for Loyola's standout academic and athletic programs.
Loyola changes lives.
Michael Black knows Loyola's reputation for enhancing students' minds, bodies, and spirits well. He's Loyola's interim principal. He's also a graduate. Administrators are excited. Loyola High School Detroit is preparing to celebrate 14 consecutive years of 100% senior class college acceptance.
Well, I think you have to be willing and committed to providing full wraparound services for your students.
This school, students say, has been a hub where they've been able to develop personally, emotionally, socially, and spiritually, with help from dedicated faculty and staff who they lean on as mentors. When you think about Loyola High School, how special is this school to you?
It's special to me because it opens up brotherhood to me. I get to meet new people, see new faces.
Raylon Murray is a junior at Loyola. He's a standout scholar, and he's active in rugby, football, basketball, the chess club, and even the choir.
You gotta have discipline on the field and in the classroom because it gotta go hand in hand.
This campus is also committed to giving back to its immediate community. Right now, construction is underway. The school's building a new chapel.
We're very excited. It's a 200-seat chapel.
President David Smith says the new chapel will be a gathering space for services, and the school's constructing a new welcome center, making the entrance to Fenkell more inviting.
We're proud of our neighborhood, and we're looking forward to staying here and contributing to the community.
And again, that's just one of the hidden gems that folks are telling us about in this community. You know, Karen, coming up at 5:30, as we always do, we'll be diving into some of the community issues that you told us about that are important to you. Kind of like how the city is being proactive right now in addressing some of the blight concerns that neighbors have in this area.
Yeah, that really is an issue. We'll talk about that, and also we'll be going through this rec center. It's kind of quiet in this room because they have to pay attention. You can't be loud, right?
It's a quiet zone.
But we're going to talk a little bit. I was going to say, we're going to the boxing ring next, so that's going to be fun. I'm excited for that. So there's much more ahead on Local 4 News, so we'll send it back to you, Devin, and we'll check back with you at the end of the show as well.
You got it. All right, guys, we'll see you then. Still ahead, Coca-Cola fighting off new competition with its first new flavor in years. We'll have a preview of that a little later, first at 4. Also, this escape from rising floodwaters. That guy pretty lucky, but the timing of his bad decision played out for everyone to see. We're going to show you that in a minute. But first, Congress stuck in a stalemate. What that means for Israel, Ukraine, the southern American border, and a possible impeachment.
Restaurant freezers. How long would you last if the cooler door suddenly closes and you can't get out? Next, Inside Edition.
Coming up next on Inside Edition on Local 4.
Dance contest.
Watch the
dance is over. Call a letter.
Wheel of Fortune, tonight at 7, only on Local 4.
You've asked yourself, is this the winter you get new windows? It can be when you call Wallside Windows. It's our buy one, get one free sale. Plus, you'll get 72 months interest-free. 1-800-521-7800.
I would 100% recommend Christensen Law.
If you've been seriously injured, call us. Listen,
protect,
win. It's what we do.
When the party feels dead, put a little bit on red.
You know I love to spin.
When you're sitting on the throne and you get in that zone.
It's when the fun begins.
When the day is gone, you can still play on.
We'll take a chance, we're in.
Or when the play is yuck, it's time to try your luck.
And go straight for the win.
Life would be dull if we never took a chance. Bet Rivers.
Take a chance.
Diamonds at historic lows. Half-carat solitaires $2.99, 1 carat $5.99, 2 carat $14.90. Our lowest price ever. 1 carat studs $3.49. Thousands of GIA diamonds, guaranteed the lowest price, set while you watch. The Jewelry Exchange, Livonia.
Local 4 News is live in Warren.
Covering the changes here.
New Warren Mayor Lori Stone is here to talk to us about the future of this city.
Accomplishing some great things here.
Definitely building some leaders.
A lot of people talking about the economy.
And tonight at 5:30, we're in Detroit at the Adams Butzel Complex.
We're proud of our neighborhood.
Hearing about the issues.
To remediate as much blight as possible.
There's underrepresentation for good quality health care.
Local 4 News is in your neighborhood tonight at 5:30.
Here at Precision, we know it's an emergency when the weather's cold and you're stuck in your garage.
There's no really a good time to tell when the spring's going to break. It just breaks. That's where we come into play.
Fixing garage doors is what we do here at Precision.
There's nothing we haven't seen and nothing we can't fix.
People get very excited when we roll up.
These vehicles are like a warehouse on wheels. We can fix any make, any model. Quality service quickly, that's what you get with Precision.
Precision Garage Door. Garage doors done right.
Expect more with forewarned weather. Always watching, always tracking.
It's Wallside's buy one, get one free sale. Plus, get 72 months interest-free with no down payment. For 80 years, we've been making homeowners happy and comfortable. Call 1-800-521-7800.
Circle. Hey everybody, Hank Winchester, help me Hank. We are here at Savvy Sliders. We are on the west side. We're on Livernois, not far from Ewald Circle, west of the lodge. We are here because we want to connect with you in your community. If you are nearby, if you have a story, a tip, a consumer issue you need help with, stop on by here. We're going to be at the Savvy Sliders through the evening newscast, again, right on Livernois. I'm Hank Winchester, help me Hank. Back to you guys.
You got it. All right, Hank. The battle over the border has thrown several key issues up in the air on Capitol Hill, and Republicans fail to impeach a member of the cabinet. This afternoon, Senate Republicans just blocked a bipartisan border bill that included foreign aid on top of border funding. So now Democratic Senate Leader Chuck Schumer says he will force a vote on standalone war funding for both Israel and Ukraine without the border provisions. Last night, House Republicans fell a few votes short of impeaching Homeland Security Director Alejandro Mayorkas. They are vowing they're going to try again.
Now, forewarned weather with ExactTrack 4D radar. Exclusive technology for the most up-to-the-minute weather information in your neighborhood.
A good deal of sunshine today being replaced by, let's call it filtered sunshine, as clouds are moving in from the west. So probably going to be a good-looking sunset for some of us this evening. The big story the next couple of days is the rain and the mild temperatures. Well above where we should be this time of the year. Still in the middle to upper 40s across most of the area. And you'll see what I'm talking about. Normal high this time of the year, 33 going up to 34 degrees over the next 4 days. We're going to knock that out of the park. Mid-50s tomorrow. Some spots may even touch 60 on Friday, and that's where we are talking record-breaking territory. The current record is 56, so we are forecasted to beat that. We'll dive more into heat coming up at 5 o'clock. But you can see back out to the west, here's the rain crossing into Wisconsin. It's going to get here shortly after this time tomorrow and maybe even hang around for some of us for Friday morning. We'll time it out for you for the rest of this evening and tonight. Clouds are on the increase by daybreak tomorrow. Here is 7 a.m. We'll see more clouds, but yeah, we're hopeful that we'll get just a little bit of sunshine, maybe a bit more during the afternoon. But notice that the majority of Thursday is dry. Here's 5 o'clock. Heading home from the office should be a-okay. But after sunset is when we see rain chances start to move in. Here's 8 o'clock. A few scattered showers. For the most part, this is just light to moderate rain, little to no impact, but there will be some wet roads and the umbrellas will be needed if you're going to be out during that time. It should be out of here by about midnight. That's the first batch of rain. The second batch is not going to be nearly as robust. Now, I think this model might be underdoing it just a bit, but we will have a couple of showers moving through very early on Friday. It won't last long, though. By 9-10 a.m., we're already getting into some sunshine. That, though, won't last for very long, as we could see maybe a few more showers on Saturday morning. So impact-wise, later Thursday, we are talking about some light to moderate rain, so let's call it moderate impacts. Going forward for the rest of tonight, low to mid 30s, maybe a couple of upper 20s in the suburbs, but that's about it. More clouds are on the increase. 54 tomorrow, well above where we should be this time of the year, with those showers moving in during the evening. Here's your 7-day, and again, I've got that slight chance in there for Saturday morning. There could be a quick shower, maybe a drop on Sunday, but that's about it. Back to reality, upper 30s, Devin, next week.
You got it all right, Brett. Still ahead here on First at 4. Under pressure, Coca-Cola hoping a touch of spice will be nice for its bottom line. But first, a live report on dangerous flooding takes a surprising turn, and you will see it next.
Alerting you to issues days in advance. Forewarn weather, always watching, always tracking. Powered by Victor's Home Solutions. Schedule a free roof inspection today at victors.com.
Hey,